Have you ever been in a position where you thought you just needed to have one more conversation and you could salvage it? Or maybe if you just gave them a different perspective or another testimonial or just gave it a few more weeks, it would all shake itself out and it would be smooth sailing from here. The reality is, when the trust is gone, the deal is dead. And that is what we are talking about today on the Opt-in podcast. I am Melissa Franks, your host. And here we talk about how we go from surviving to thriving in business. Today, we are talking all about the signals that we get when the deal is good and dead and when it's time to give it up and move on. I know none of us want to talk about this. We always think we can turn a situation around. We always think we can turn a relationship around. We always think there might be one possible thing that we can offer, give, deliver, fix that will salvage the deal, the relationship, and ultimately get us all going in the same direction again. And I'm going to bust your bubble. I'm going to bust it. It's just not possible all of the time. And that's the good news. The good news is that it's not possible, which means that you don't end up in a toxic relationship or environment or deal gone wrong for a prolonged period of time. The bad news is that your ego is going to take a hit. And it may be difficult for you to see a way through, out, and forward. So we're going to talk about exactly what to do when you know a relationship or a deal has gone south and how to handle it like a boss, shut it down with integrity, and move on. I want to tell all of you a little bit of a story before we get into the mechanics of how to diagnose and what to do. I worked in corporate for 25 years, and as many of you know, I started as an administrative assistant doing anything that anybody would ask me to do, and eventually I got to the C-suite, where I was the boss of bosses. And over that time, what I learned is that relationships were queen. That in order to do anything well in life, you needed to have strategic relationships. You needed to have relationships where you trusted the person without limits. And then you needed to keep your friends close and your enemies closer sorts of relationships. And all of these relationships served a different purpose. And ultimately, they gave you a 360-degree landscape and view of what was happening, what the opportunities were that were coming up, who was messing up where, what you wanted to stay away from. And really, if you paid attention, gave you the instructions on how to navigate the political landscape that is known as corporate America. Now, it took me probably a decade before I realized that grit, determination, hard work, and drive were not the keys to success. They're helpful to a certain point, but ultimately, it's being able to build relationships, manage relationships, maintain relationships, even in adversarial conditions, that sets you apart from the rest and really gets you to a successful place. I watched deal makers who, before walking into the room, would tell me how much they despised the person they were going in to meet with, and they would come out with 9-figure contracts. I watched them work rooms and shake hands and kiss babies, and all of it came down to the relationship. And when I asked one at one point during my career, what's the secret? They said, very simply, the secret is trust. That while you may not get along, you may not even respect each other, if there is a foundation in place demonstrating that you can be trusted to do what you say you're going to do, the deal will always get done. And this was really interesting to me because I had never really considered that trust was optional. To me, in my naive moment, long before I hit the C-suite, I just made an assumption that if I was working hard and delivering results and acting with integrity, that everybody around me trusted me and I could trust everybody else. Shortly thereafter, I learned that in fact, that was not the case. And not everybody can be trusted. And you need to look for subtle cues and who they're in relationships with, who they help, who they support, who they talk poorly about, to understand how trustworthy they are. So by the time I got to the C-suite, I understood this game really well. I knew who I could trust. I knew who I couldn't. I knew where the snakes were in the grass, and I found myself in a situation. I was responsible for all of the North American accounts. I had never sold anything a day in my life unless you count the jeans that I sold at the Gap outlet a really long time ago. If we count that, then I'm a really great salesperson. I definitely had never managed client relationships at this magnitude and this scale. And what was even more challenging is that we were in kind of this situation where they had to be our client and we had to be their service provider. And there weren't really any other options. And because one would think, well, then, hey, this is a slam dunk. It makes it really easy. And in fact, it made it more difficult than anything else that I have ever done in my life. Because you see, it was a mandate that we entered the relationship. It wasn't a choice. And this is where that trust card comes in. So I want to play something forward to you, a scenario that happened and what the outcome was. And I'm going to do so, without naming names and speaking about functions, but those involved probably know who they are. But there was a time, and I feel like it was 2019, maybe it was 2020. So we were all definitely remote at this point. I was introduced to a new team member, a client. And this person was not a peer. This person was a couple of levels below me and incredibly confrontational. And that wasn't new. There had been a lot of confrontational people in that space for quite a while. So I knew how to put on my flak jacket and roll my sleeves and get in there. And what kept coming up over and over and over again was problem after problem after problem. And then what started to happen was massive micromanagement. We need a report for everything. We need a status meeting for everything. We need to get on calls until we solve a problem. We need to check and check and check and check your work. We want in your systems, in your tools. We want to know what you're doing. We want to be in your head. This was micromanagement at a level I had never seen. I understood. We were in a period of transition where my organization was starting to do some things that organization had done before, and this person was relatively new in her leadership role, and she was wanting to do a good job, and I respect all those things. And so, we got together in a conversation. And I knew that the intended outcome of that conversation was for me to figure out what was really going on. Because it wasn't about the quality of service that we were delivering, because we were knocking it out of the park. It wasn't about even personality conflicts amongst the team. There was something else going on. And we had one of those meetings that never ended. We had been in there for 90 minutes with no end in sight. And finally I said, hey, we're not making it very far. Is it okay if I just ask some questions to make sure I have clarity? I'm not in these meetings a lot because the truth was I was never in those meetings. I was always getting reports back. It was not my job to be in those meetings. My team, my great team, it was their job. So I asked if I could just ask some questions. And that's what I did. I spent the next 45 minutes asking questions. And by the end of that 40 minutes, my last question was a doozy. And it was this. So based on what you've told me, we are meeting expectations with delivery. We are managing things as you would expect. And you do not trust that we will do a good job long term and care about this as much as you do. Is that correct? Mic drop. The room was silent because their answer eventually was yes. You see, we had been providing all the reports and having all the meetings and explaining all the things and showing process flows and steps and still doing our day job. And what it came down to is they just didn't trust us. She didn't trust me. Her people didn't trust my team. There was no trust. And I walked out of that meeting and I said to the team really directly, I said, we've got two choices. We can either try to build trust or we can throw in the towel. Now, because I was in corporate America and throwing in the towel wasn't really an option, we decided to try. And what we did is we time boxed it. And I went to my boss, the CEO, and I said, here's the deal. They don't trust us. They don't want to trust us. And this is going to get a whole lot worse before it gets better. And my recommendation is we just give it back. We just give it back. It's no skin off our nose. I've got plenty of stuff to do. My team's crazy busy over here. We don't need it. I'll go explain to the powers that be that we gave it back, and I'll take the hit for it, and that will be that. Because I knew, walking out of that meeting, I knew that trust it wasn't on the table. They weren't offering it up. They weren't saying, if you do these 5 things, we will start to build a bridge of trust. They were saying, we just don't trust you. You can do whatever you want to do. We're still not going to trust you. And so what did we do? We tried. We sat there, we poured cement, we put in posts, we started building the bridge. And every time we got that bridge built, every time we got about halfway across, they came in from the other side and started taking it apart, saying it wasn't built right. It wasn't strong enough. We used the wrong wood. They continued to dismantle the bridge. And then we would go back and we would build it again, and then they would do it again. And this went on for 6 or 9 months. And by that time, I had spent resources. I had had employees quit. I had people that were disgruntled and unhappy. And then I met with this woman again, and I said, hey, based on what you told me back in October, and based on what I'm observing today, this is the situation. Our delivery's meeting your expectations. We're providing the reporting that you need. We're managing things as you would expect us to. And yet you still do not trust us to manage it long term. And unlike 9 months prior, her reaction was volatile. She was angry. She was emotional. She came after me, not only in that meeting, but she came for me and my job and my integrity, and started filing reports with HR, was gossiping, and came for my job. And I remember very vividly that at the end of that 9 months, I went back into those rooms and I said, listen, my recommendation remains the same. Without trust, there is no future. Let's just give it back to them and move on and keep going. You see, for me, in that instance, I had awareness that the deal was dead. The deal had been dead 9 months before. The ship had sailed. There was no reparations. There was no trust to be built. In fact, she had decided where she stood, and that was going to be the end of it. And fast forward to today, no longer work in the corporate world. Fast forward to today, I'm no longer COO of that organization. Fast forward to today, the anger for which she carried around because I called her on it and said, this is trust thing is an issue. And if we cannot, as leaders together, figure it out, we can't work together. Our teams can't work together. We can't be successful. That fueled her into retaliatory actions, which ultimately I didn't want to put up with. And so when I opened today and I told you that if there is no trust, there is no deal, I want to save you all of the pain and agony I went through. Because listen, I can't get into a lot of the details, but that 18 months was horrible. Horrible. And really the 18 months before that was also horrible. And it all came down to the fact that we were trying to continue to deliver services, make offers, sell things, and manage accounts for people that didn't trust us. The deal was dead before it ever started, and yet we kept trying. Definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over and over again and expecting the same result. So here's what I want to tell you about trust in business. When you are acting with integrity, when you are making an offer and you understand the value that you are delivering, when you are in a sales conversation, when you are onboarding a new client, you are optimistic. You see the world of possibility. You see that there's so much potential. What you might miss is the hesitancy and the skepticism on the other side. As a part of your due diligence before you ever sign a contract, before you ever exchange money, before you ever do any of those things, the very best thing that you can do for yourself, and this is step number 1, is understand the backstory. Why your service? Why your offer? Why your business? Why now? What have you tried in the past? Who have you worked with? How has that gone? What was great about it? What wasn't great about it? Why did the relationship end? And you ask the person, you ask the business that you're planning to go into business with, and you also go out and you ask the marketplace. There is nothing out there in the world that says when they tell you that they worked with John Smith that you can't go ask John Smith, what was it like? What advice do you have for me if I go into this working relationship with this business or this person? Do your homework. Because while you are optimistic and excited about the future, you may have somebody on the other side that has hesitancy, has battle scars, who's got bias that you don't know anything about because they appear to be as optimistic as you. You need to know the backstory. How did they arrive at the decision they need to work with you? What came before? What have they tried? How has it worked? Step number 1, understand the backstory. Once you know what the backstory is, then you need to ask yourself, is there a pattern? So what you're doing, has it been done before with 5 other companies, none of it working out? Or did they try one approach that's materially different than yours and it just wasn't a good fit for the business? What you find out and determine if there is an underlying motive that you need to suss out. Are there more conversations to be had? And so what you should do after you do your homework is you should have a conversation and say, you know what, I went back and I talked to John Smith and Sally Sue and Johnny Depp, who all provided you XYZ service before, and they all said the same thing. This is what they were saying were the challenges from their perspective. You know, what were the challenges from your perspective? And you're not doing it in a confrontational or an antagonistic way. You're just like, I want to make sure that we don't end up in the same place as you did with them. So can we talk through what happened so that we can ensure from the outset that we do better? You're coming from a place of learning and curiosity and inquisitiveness. You're also vetting the deal. It's not good enough that they're ready to hand you your credit card, because if you have a deal that's not based on trust, that isn't going to be successful, what's the point? Okay. So the second thing is talk to them about what you learn. See what the reaction is. See if they come to the table with you and talk about how you could put your relationship together, how you could provide services, how you could deliver results for them in a new and different way to avoid the pitfalls that came before. So that's number 2. The third thing that I will say to you is get everything in writing. Absolutely everything. And interrogate the process. What are you going to want me to do? How many meetings are you going to want me to be in every week? Am I going to need to do reporting? What results do you want delivered? Or do you care how they're delivered? You need to interrogate everything. Specificity is king. And make sure with your contract, make sure that it clearly specifies the results and the time frame around the results that are being contracted for. Do not enter into an open-ended contract. Even a retainer contract, you need to be specific about what will be delivered. Number 4, ensure that you have an open line of communication to the decision maker and that they are willing to provide you feedback. Because as a part of your contract, you're going to have a remedy section that says, if you were unhappy with the services I provide, you have X amount of days to fix the problem. You don't want to have to enact that remedy clause. What you want is you want to be able to have dialogue as you go, so they're providing you feedback and you can make adjustments as you go. And then once you sign the contract and you exchange money and you start doing things and things aren't what you expected or what they expected, and things get a little adversarial or they get a little bit tricky, nip it in the bud. Just like that example that I gave you, as soon as I saw things going south, what did I do? I got into a room and I got curious. And I interrogated and I asked questions. Because at the very beginning, if you hear warning bells, that's the time to start asking questions. That's the time to dig in. Because you'll be able to make an assessment right there. Can I turn this around, or should I keep it moving? And if it's time to go, this isn't working out, it's okay, because you're acting with integrity and you're calling off before things get ugly. Now, you may not see it coming. You may believe that you can salvage any situation. You may not want to give up, and that's your prerogative too. But what I want to share with you is what the outcome potentially could be if you enter a deal where there is no trust or trust is lost and then you stay there too long. The first thing that you're going to do is you're going to damage your brand. It's the very first thing you're going to do. Because that one person, that one company that doesn't have trust in you, that's frustrated, that has feelings about what's going on, they're going to tell 10 people. And those 10 people are going to tell those 10 people. And that spreads like wildfire. One unsatisfied customer is a brand problem. Okay? So that's the very first thing. Your brand is going to take a hit. And frankly, the more effort you put into salvaging it and causing them to mistrust you more, the more damage that's done. That's the first one. The second one is that you are going to lose money on the deal. You're going to end up spending more time, more of your time, more of your team's time, more time in general, trying to fix the relationship than you are delivering results. Your contract was for delivering results. It wasn't for this relationship repair stuff. The more investment that you have to put in to try to turn it around, to gain trust back, to really improve the relationship, the more money you lose. So you have to remember at the outset of that deal, all that you were doing was saying, this is how much I'm going to charge you for the value and the results I'm going to provide. You didn't cushion it with, and in case stuff goes sideways, I'm going to tack on an extra 25%. That's not in the contract. So you're losing money. You're diminishing your brand and you're losing money. And the third thing that can happen is you can lose your team. So in that corporate example that I gave you, not only did we massively increase our overhead spend for something that did not need very much money on it, so we lost money, not only did I lose employees, I actually had 2 people quit during that time because they couldn't deal with the client and work in that environment anymore. But my brand, my professional brand, took a massive hit because of the situation. And not because I couldn't deliver results. The irony was that globally, I was getting accolades for the work that I was doing. But locally, I was a lamb taken out of slaughter. You see, even in the corporate world, when you're in a situation, in a deal, in a relationship where there is no trust, you still lose on your personal brand. You still cost the company way more money than you should. And your team is going to suffer and may potentially leave you high and dry. So what's the best thing to do? Okay, so here's the deal. You enter relationships in good faith. You enter contracts in good faith. You start delivering services. Things look great. And then all of a sudden, disaster strikes. And it's a mess. And things have fallen apart. Nobody trusts anybody. People are being emotional. People are being angry. You call it. It's business. The worst thing that you can do is prolong a situation where nobody's getting value. And all they're doing is spending money. That's where you start to lack integrity. So the very first thing and the very best thing that you do is you call it, and you call it early. There's always another deal to be done. Always, 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 always. This just isn't the deal for you. Don't die on the sword. Don't throw it all in to salvage this deal. It's never going to be worth it. Because even if you turn it around, even if you deliver and they say that they're satisfied, they're always going to have a bad taste in their mouth. And that is going to translate to brand degradation. It's going to translate to bad referrals. It's going to translate into negative impact to your business. Call it early, finish with professionalism, and move on. The final thing is you never talk about it publicly. Ever. The very last thing that you do when a deal dies, trust is broken, you have to call it, you gotta move on, is that you do it with your head held high and your integrity intact. As difficult as that relationship was, as difficult as that scenario in corporate was for me, where my professional brand was damaged and my team left and I had somebody literally gunning for me, never once in a public forum did I say anything negative about that team ever. And I still have not to this day. See, the thing is that I know that all of that behavior was due to insecurity. And I actually felt bad for that part of the organization. Actually, it's sympathy. I could be empathetic for their situation. I wasn't angry. I still to this day am not angry. I wish that they could have seen that there was a different and better way. I wish that they could have picked up their head and gotten out of their environment and understood that we were all there for the greater good. I firmly wish and believe that if they worked in a different way and interacted with people in a different way, they could have such a better outcome and find so much joy in work. It just wasn't what they wanted to do. And I don't fault them for that. To each their own. No skin off my nose either. The biggest mistake that I made was not leaving when I knew I should have. I didn't call it early enough. And I suffered the consequences of not doing that. So the last thing that I want to say to you is that deals are going to go sideways. People are going to lose trust in you. You're going to lose trust in people. The business is tricky and messy. And the best thing that you can do is remove your emotions, assess the situation, and make a call. And then absolutely act with integrity. You're never going to win if you're talking about somebody else. You're never going to win if you badmouth somebody else. And the truth of the matter is sometimes you just don't trust people. Sometimes you just don't vibe and you just don't gel, and that is okay too. So the moral of the story is, when the trust is gone, the deal is dead. I hope you learned something from this podcast today. This is one of my favorite topics to talk about, the human element in business, and how we're also overly optimistic. We miss the cues and the signals sometimes that we should just get out of the way and move on. So you'll be hearing more of these topics as we go through. I hope for now that this was helpful to you. And until we have another conversation, please know that you are wise and you are strong and you are brave, and I believe in you.